Hey everyone, my name is Ashley, and the book I read was Radical Candor: How to Be a Kick-Ass Boss Without Losing Your Humanity by Kim Scott. Kim Scott is a self-made entrepreneur and former Google and Apple executive, where she led many successful management teams and developed her own management style from her personal experiences with being a good and bad boss. Throughout the book, she shares these experiences and discusses her former boss's communication styles as well, which led to her creating this access and influenced to develop her own style, which she calls Radical Candor. Her biggest premise on this book is to be a good boss, you have to do two things. You have to care personally about the people who work for you, and you have to be really open with feedback in order to challenge directly. And radical candor is what happens when you put care personally and challenge directly together. The author chose radical because so many of us are conditioned to not say what we really think to avoid conflict or embarrassment. But in a boss, that kind of avoidance is disastrous. And candor was chosen instead of honesty because when you're being candor, you're simply offering your view on what's going on and that you expect people to offer theirs. So the first part of radical candor describes the four different communication styles and how you may not always fall into one quadrant, but to be aware of which one you're in and how to transition more towards radical candor behavior. And at some point in your career, like Kim, you might find yourself in all four. So this book is a guide to help successfully navigate through these quadrants while building team communication that focuses on combining high levels of caring with high levels of directness. So a team who can communicate in this way has already created a community of trust and knows criticisms are meant to be constructive. I'm going to briefly discuss each quadrant and try to keep in mind which one that you may fall into. First, we have obnoxious aggression, which is brutal honesty, also known as front stabbing. And it's when we challenge directly but fail to care personally. She describes this as basically when we behave as a jerk. It's praise that doesn't feel sincere or criticism and feedback that isn't delivered kindly. Next, we have ruinous empathy, and this is when you care too much about the other person's feelings and fail to challenge them directly. It's praise that isn't specific enough to help the person understand what was good, or criticism that is sugar-coated and unclear, or simply silence. If an employee messes up and you don't want to hurt their feelings, you don't say anything, and they keep messing up and keep messing up to the point where they just get fired, which ultimately cheats your team out of growth opportunities. And now the worst quadrant of all is manipulative insincerity, which is when you neither care personally or challenge directly, which can cause passive aggressive behavior and backstabbing. It's praise that is insincere because you're too worried about your image and how people will perceive you. So you're basically being fake and talking harshly and criticizing them behind their back. Radical candor is based on the premise that when properly executed, radically candid praise and criticism helps managers build trust with employees, open the door for good communication with teams, create more job satisfaction and less misery for employees, and focuses on specific situation, behaviors, and words rather than judging their employees' character. The way to use this framework is to move every conversation you have towards radical candor. And it's easy to fall in all of the quadrants at some point, and I think we have all experienced managers and colleagues that quickly fall into one of the different three categories. I felt ruminous empathy to be the most interesting one when we think about the importance of the relationship. We fail to challenge directly, which essentially means we don't care about their personal development, which fails to build trust on either side. Radical candor focuses on a new management philosophy where bosses achieve results not by doing everything themselves, but by guiding a team to do so, which is where I think our field can relate to the most because as RDs, we work together in a healthcare team setting, and When you're an advocate for your patients to the doctors, you want everyone on your team motivated to achieve results. And to be a great boss, you must excel in your own work and in these three key areas. Guidance, so soliciting and offering constructive criticism and encouraging feedback between people. Team building, putting the right people in the right roles and keeping them motivated. And results, managing the people on your team to deliver results. And at the heart of all three roles is you building trusting relationships by caring personally and challenging directly. Lastly, I wanted to share her Get Stuff Done wheel, which is based on the assumption that telling people what to do doesn't work. So she created a 7-step process that can support growth, which I found the most helpful when building my own management style and leading a team in the future. First, you have to listen to the ideas that people on your team have and create a culture where they listen to each other. Next, you have to create space where ideas can be sharpened and clarified to make sure these ideas don't get crushed before everyone fully understands their potential usefulness. But just because an idea is easy to understand doesn't mean it's a good one. Next, you have to debate ideas and test them carefully. Then you need to decide quickly, but not too quickly. Since not everyone will be involved in the listen, clarify, debate, decide part of the cycle for every idea, the next step is to bring the broader team along, and you have to persuade those who weren't involved in a decision that it was a good one so that everyone can execute it effectively. Then, having executed, you have to learn from the results, whether or not you did the right thing, and start the whole process over again. Ideas I think are most important for other students to get out of this book would be awareness of which communication quadrant you currently fall into and how to improve the style to be the best future boss you can be. While I agree with the concept to challenge directly and encourage to give and receive criticism, it has to be used in the right context, specifically when you have an established level of trust and respect within a team first. So if your team members don't have empathy for their coworkers, it's too easy to deliver harsh criticism and excuse it by claiming, oh, it's just like radical candor behavior, when harsh criticism is in fact not radical candor. So I find it more difficult to implement this within an organization and team because you can't force coworkers to have cohesiveness and always get along and always trust each other and always like each other. Although this is ideal, there is a fine line on how and when to start incorporating candid feedback while also gaining respect from employees and colleagues. So there is a big difference between criticizing actions and character. For example, by saying, you were late to that meeting, that's a criticism. Or if you say, you're always late, that is more of a personal attack. So just being aware of how you say things can easily move you from one quadrant to the next. I personally love the philosophy behind Radical Candor. I really enjoyed this book and the culture it encourages organizations to follow. I often find myself in the ruinous empathy quadrant because I always want to be liked and I don't want anyone to be upset, so I don't always say what I want in a group setting all the time. So I find myself just picking up the slack from teammates because I don't give them criticism and I just take control and do it myself, which isn't a great way to lead. So I plan to utilize the concepts of radical candor behavior in communication as a guide when I am a future manager.